Hello, hello. This is Josh Kulp. We are learning Daf Shevui. We are on Masechet Kiddushin, and we're learning Daf Daled. We're getting into sort of the nitty-gritties of Kiddushin here. Some of the questions of where do we know these laws from? A very common question that the Talmud asks. How do we know this? There's even a book written by Jay Harris called How Do We Know This? But I wanted to talk today about the categorization of women by ages. I want to talk a little bit about the background to that because we're going to encounter three terms, and I want to make sure that people have clarity over those three terms and also why the rabbis have these three terms. One is the ktana, a young girl, a na'ara, a youthful girl, I would translate, and a bogeret, a girl who's reached majority age. So ktana, na'ara, bogeret. So going back to the Torah mentions various laws, but never mentions the ages to which they apply. So there's various parts of the Torah that talk about a na'ara, for instance. I use the word na'ara, but never explain what age a girl is a na'ara, and that's pretty typical of the Torah's laws, especially for something like marriage. One would have trouble living one's life purely through the words of the Torah without some kind of extraneous body of knowledge, which Jews often call the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And I think that to a certain extent, though, even without a Torah Sheba'al Peh, they leave it to common sense. A common sense would say that what does it mean to be a na'ara? A na'ara, a youthful girl, is relatively youngish, probably does not have her own kids, or very unlikely has her own kids, is not married, and is still living in her father's household. That is a social a definition of what a na'ara is. And I imagine when the Torah refers to a na'ara, that's exactly what they're referring to. A young girl, old enough to understand the implications of her actions, not like a 3-year-old, but some girl around the time when girls are beginning to think of getting married. We don't really know. It's hard to know in the ancient world. A lot of people ask me all the time, how old were people at the typical age of marriage? And we always have to distinguish between things such as the possible and the usual. Right? It is possible maybe to get married at a very young age, but it is unusual to get married at that age. I would say, like, let's say in our society, I don't know, it depends on the state, it's possible to get married at 16 with your parents' permission, but in my circles, probably in the circles of people listening to this, it is very unusual to get married at such a young age. So there's the possible, and then there's the usual. There's also the texts that urge younger marriage, and versus the reality. In other words, the preferable versus the realistic. Rabbis clearly seem to think it's preferable to get married at younger ages, but that shouldn't be read as that it's realistic or usual that girls or boys, for that matter, got married at such young ages. So you got to be very careful with trying to figure out the age of marriage. It's always best to do so through actual documentation, but that's hard to do for the period under discussion. Another thing to remember is that we're talking about a patriarchy. If that hasn't been hammered into your head yet, it will be. Fathers have control over their children, and I'm emphasizing children, not just daughters, but fathers have control over their sons and daughters, mothers, but maybe to a limited extent. Fathers can make major decisions about their children, their economic future, who they marry. Back then it was common, if not 100% common, for parents to choose, at least the first marriage, for both sons and daughters. And fathers maybe not have a right to execute their own children, but they have a lot of power over making decisions for their children. And we encounter such power throughout the Torah. But the rabbis there's two things it's important to remember about the rabbis. First of all, the rabbis are legalists. And in a court, we can't deal with this kind of fuzzy thinking. We can't say, well, a father has a power over his daughter while she's a na'ara. Well, what's a na'ara? We need an age, right? Because anytime it comes to a court, it means that there is a conflict between two people. The girl, assumedly, is saying, my dad has no more power over me, and the father is saying, I do have power over her, and the judge, an adjudicator, would need to know at what age does that power end. Now, that's the first thing. Rabbis are not discussing reality, they're discussing legalism. Right, legal reality. Now, the second thing is that the rabbis take a very drastic line in determining when a girl reaches majority age, one that I think is without doubt not reflective of reality. For the rabbis, a ketana is a girl who has not yet reached puberty. So roughly speaking, up until the age of 12, and eventually that gets standardized into exactly up until the age of 12. A na'ara is a very, very brief inter-period between being a ketana, being a girl, prepubescent girl, and a girl who's actually of majority age. And according to many rabbinic texts, this happens over 6 months. A girl goes from being a na'ara to being a bogeret, a girl of majority age, over whom a father has no power. In which case she decides her own wedding partner, all of her financial benefits go to her. She's basically independent of her father at that very young age, which could be around 12 and a half if she's already hit puberty. So again, a ketana is the young girl up until 12. A na'ara is a 12-year-old girl who has hit puberty, and a bogeret is that girl 6 months later. The whole process is delayed if puberty doesn't hit at 12, so you could have like a 13-year-old who becomes a na'ara, who becomes a bogeret by hitting puberty. A little bit confusing in some of those areas, but generally speaking, we think of it as 0 to 12, 12 to 12 and a half, and post 12 and a half. And again, I find it very unlikely that girls, realistically, were financially and authoritatively independent of their fathers at the tender young age of 12 and a half. While physically able to procreate, that is not an age that is of maturity, neither then nor now. Maybe they were more mature, but more likely, most scholars think that girls began to get married closer to the age of 18 to 20 and not 12 to 14, as we might imagine from reading Talmudic texts. We'll have more to say about this, but I thought that was something good to get out here in the beginning of the Masechet.